Today we're looking at Practice Test 5, the first reading passage, the literature passage. It's adapted from William Maxwell, The Folded Leaf, copyright 1959, originally published in 1945. Number 1. Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from Limey's experience reading a book to descriptions of people in the restaurant. D. The passage begins with the main character Limey sitting in a restaurant and reading a history book. The first paragraph describes the book in front of him. The second paragraph reveals what Limey is reading about and suggests his intense concentration on the book. In the third paragraph, the focus of the passage shifts to a description and discussion of others in the restaurant, namely, a party of 4, 2 men and 2 women. Number 2. The main purpose of the first paragraph is to C. Convey the passage's setting by describing a place and an object. The main purpose of the first paragraph is to establish the passage's setting by describing a place and an object. The place is the Alcazar restaurant, which is described as being long and narrow and decorated with art moderne, murals and plants, and the object is the history book Limey is reading. Number 3. It can reasonably be inferred that Irma, the waitress, thinks Limey is through eating because C. He is no longer holding his fork. The passage states that when Limey puts down his fork and began to count, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. It is reasonable to assume that Irma thinks Limey is finished eating because he is no longer holding his fork. 4 and 5 were paired questions. Number 4, Limey's primary impression of the party of 4 is that they are noisy and distracting. The passage makes it clear that Limey finds the party of 4 who enter the restaurant to be loud and bothersome, as their entrance means he is no longer able to concentrate on his book. They laughed more than there seemed to be any occasion for, and their laughter was too loud, but it was the women's voices which caused Limey to skim over 2 whole pages without knowing what was on them. And we found that in C, lines 55 through 59. Number 6. The narrator indicates that Limey finally closes the history book because A. His father has joined him at the table. In the passage, Limey closes his book only after a coat that he recognized as his father's was hung on the hook next to his chair. It is Limey's father's arrival that causes him to close the book. 7. The primary impression created by the narrator's description of Mr. Peters in lines 74 through 79 is that he is D. Aging and shriveled. In lines 74 through 79, the narrator describes Mr. Peters as gray and balding, noting that he has lost weight and his color is poor. This description suggests Mr. Peters is aging and losing strength and vigor. Number 8. The main idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters, B, behaves as if he is a younger version of himself. In the last paragraph of the passage, Mr. Peters is described as being unaware that there had been any change in his appearance since he was younger. Later in the paragraph, the passage states that the young man Mr. Peters once was had never for 1 second deserted him. The main idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters still thinks of himself as young, or at least acts as if he is a younger version of himself. Number 9. Which choice best supports the conclusion that Mr. Peters wants to attract attention? B. In lines 81 through 85, Mr. Peters is described as having straightened his tie self-consciously and gestured with a menu so that the 2 women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the 4th finger of his right hand. Mr. Peters' actions are those of someone who wants to attract attention and be noticed. Number 10. As used in line 93, becoming most nearly means fitting. The last sentence of the passage states that Mr. Peters' mischaracterization of himself makes him act in ways that are not becoming for a man of his age. In this context, becoming suggests behavior that is appropriate or fitting.